Hello and welcome to the 13th video of my Pygame tutorials. Now, what I'm looking to do this time is I want to start getting menus working in the game. So instead of just when we run the game, instead of, just coming to this screen right here and immediately begin playing the game, we actually, go on a start screen with, a couple buttons like play a game or quit or, options to, I don't know, change game music or something. Just, a standard general kind of intro screen that lets you first see the game and then actually click the play button before it starts. That way it doesn't just immediately throw you into the action. Now, the idea behind scenes with how we're going to do them is basically how we did game active. So we're basically saying while the game is active, basically run the game. That's pretty much what we're saying to this. So while the game is active, do a tick of the game, which is what we've been building since the start of this. So it's very easy to create a new type of window. So I'm actually going to separate these two, just because it's going to be chaining while loops that'll be kind of weird. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it something like intro, intro, and I'm going to set that equal to true. I'm going to say while intro, meaning while we're at the intro screen or the opening menu. What do we want to do? Well, we probably need to do the events, just because if we quit at this point, then we're going to need to see that we quit. So we'll do some events real quick. Then we'll, I don't know, just print something, just to let us know that we're in the intro menu. Pygame.display, display.update, and clock.tick. We don't need to go at a full 30 frames per second. I don't want it to spam intro so much. So we're just going to go, I don't know, 1 frame a second. That way we can see it, spam intro every now and then. Because, the intro screen, we probably don't need it to go that fast. Realistically, we might still keep it at 30 or 20. But I'm just going to, let's just keep it at 30 to keep things simple instead of 1. It's just going to spam intro a lot when we print. And this is basically what we're going to do. Is we're just going to say while the intro is here, and we don't quit, just spam intro. So now, because of course code goes line by line, we should hit the intro menu and get stuck there. Let's run it to check that. Yep, we're in this black screen with nothing to it, and intro is being spammed down here. Now, how might we leave something like this? And that's awkward. Apparently, the Pygame event quit is not working. Oh, well, we can hit this red box here to force stop it from the console. Why isn't that working? For event in Pygame event, if event type is a quit. Oh, game active equals false. What I should have said is, actually, both of those will work. If we quit at this point, then we want to just completely quit itself. So, in the intro menu, we probably need to change this, actually, if we want it to actually quit the game by saying pygame.quit and a normal quit. So let's do that. Pygame.quit, and then a normal quit. I just want to run this one more time to make sure that actually is going to exit the game for us. And it does. And I actually wanted to create another event. So if event.type equals a pygame.keydown, if event.key equals pygame.keyQ, we'll just use this as a short example for now. So this is the Q key on the keyboard, the one next to the W. And if this happens, we're just going to say intro equals false. And what should happen is when we hit Q, intro goes to false, while intro, now it's false. We're going to get rid of it, so this whole thing is going to end, and we're going to start the game active. That's what should happen. Let's make sure it does. So, black screen. Intro gets spammed. We already know we can hit the X to close out. Let's hit Q, and the game started. Well, that's pretty neat. Intro stopped spamming because we left the intro loop, and now we're here in the actual game. So, while game active, I want to do one more thing before we convert this to its own game object, which I'll talk about that later. That's another plan that I have for this video. But now that we know that we can get an intro loop going, and of course, inside of this intro where print is happening, we would do all the stuff we do here. we could check all the active keys, we could draw stuff, check for collisions, and we can do all the exact same stuff in our other loop. This is just how a loop is. So what if we wanted another one? Well, what we can say is, since this is before it and it's actually happening beforehand quite a bit, I want to create something else. I'm going to define something called pause. And this is just a normal function. What is pause? Well, pause is basically going to say, how would I put this? So, create a local variable called pause. It's equal to true at the start of this function. While pause, meaning while pause is true, what do we want to do? Well, we probably want to do another event check. Grab this again. Check for the events, except of course this time, if we quit, we want to do a pygame.quit, and we'd want to do a standard quit. And then of course we can say the exact same thing. If event.type is equal to a pygame.key 2 equals a pygame.key down. If event.key is equal to pygame.k underscore p, then pause is over. Because while we're paused, if we hit p, we want pause to end. So pause equals false. And it seemed like I was getting some error. Yeah, this stuff just needs to be tabbed over, that's it. So we're just defining a pause loop. So basically how we control the game is, since our game runs by ticks, and every tick happens, one tick is one run of the game active loop. That means if we force this thing to get stuck in some other loop, then this tick will never happen, because it can't. If we're waiting on this loop constantly and we're not running the ticks of the while loop for the game active loop, then it essentially pauses the game because we get stopped, nothing in the game gets updated, we don't check anything in the game, we just stop to handle this function. But if this function traps us with an infinite loop, or at least a loop until we exit, then the game essentially is paused. So let me just make sure this is good. It should be. So define pause. Well, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to grab this right here, and we're actually going to just put it down here. So if event type is a key down, if the event is the button P on the keyboard, then I'm actually going to, instead of saying pause equals false, we're just going to call pause. Because it's a function, we can just call the function. It's going to set pause equal to true, and then start the infinite loop. So now we can pause the game. And what I'm actually going to do is, so you can see this, we're going to print some debug info. So game paused, and when we exit, we're going to print game unpaused, I guess. That'll work. Now let's run it. So we're here at our intro. All we have to do is hit Q to start the game. Now we can start running around. Let's hit P. Game paused. Right down here. And if we go back to the game, you'll notice nothing's happening. I can click my mouse. I can hit my arrow keys. Don't know if you can hear me actually hitting them. Sometimes you can on this mic. But I'm clicking, hitting the arrow keys. Nothing's happening. That's because our game's paused. Let's hit P one more time. Oh look, the game unpaused. Everything's stopped being frozen, so I can start clicking again and moving around. And if I wanted to, I can pause it again. Because what we're doing is we're trapping it in a loop. Right now the game is trapped in a loop. It can't continue with every tick of the game because we're stuck running this paused loop. That all the paused loop is doing is waiting for us basically to hit P. Or when we're paused, it's waiting for us to hit the X, in which case it gets rid of the game. So that's how we control menus in this. Basically, we can just define them as some type of, function here, define pause, and have that be some type of infinite loop or some loop that waits for an exit that we get stuck in. So now that we're stuck in the pause loop, the game can't continue because we can't do any of the game ticks, which is our game active loop. That's essentially how we handle the different types of menus, or the different, I guess you could call them menus. So what I'm looking at to do now is I actually want to convert this entire thing into its own game object. So to do that, we're going to call class. We're going to call this, I don't know, class tutorial game. Can't use spaces. Tutorial underscore game. Define init self. If I can remember how to type. And when we initialize the game, what exactly are we doing? Well, at the very start of the game, we've created a couple of variables. For example, when the game starts, we need all of these, at least all of these. Now, of course, we might need more, but these are just the basics of what happens when we create the game object, because we need to, we create a player, we create an objective, we create our scoreboard. This is stuff that's all being created before the game starts, meaning before the game loop. We create an FPS, we set game active. What is that equal to? I'm actually not going to be using this, and I'm not going to be using the intro one either. So I'm going to get rid of these for now, and I'm actually just going to tab everything over twice, because now it conveniently fits inside of this define game active thing. But now I got to change some stuff. Self, I don't want to call this game window anymore. Since we understand it's a game window, I'm just going to call it GW for short. And then we can say pygame.display.setCaption, because the pygame display isn't the exact same thing as self.gameWindow. They're a little bit different, so we don't need to call self on this one. We need to call self.clock. And I'm actually going to expedite this by copying the self.enemies, self.player, self.objective, and these are all variables that are associated with the game. So now we've created all of these. Well, we have an intro here. So what does our game have for functions? Well, define, how would I want to call this? Do I still want to call it an intro? Main menu yeah, let's call it a menu. So define menu. What is the menu? Well, it's going to create some local variable called menu. That's going to be equal to true. And then we're just going to say basically this entire thing right here. Of course, I'll change up the name in a second. So while menu, and then menu over here. I suppose we can keep all this stuff too. Let's see. Make sure it's all tabbed correctly. Of course that matters. Instead of clock.tick, we'd say self.clock.tick. Do you understand your... Oh. Messed up the definition a little bit. So now what we've basically done is we just have a loop that is going to handle the menu. And we can do a couple things having to do with this event system, for example. Maybe I'll look at that a little bit later. But what I probably want to do is I don't like how this is called menu, because when we call it, I'm actually going to call this go to, and then we're going to say menu. Because that's what's basically happening when we call this function. We go to the menu, we get stuck in the menu loop until we leave. And instead of this being the Q button, how about we'll just leave it as the Q button. I guess that makes sense, because if we use P again, it'll start getting confusing. We already just so happen to have a pause loop here. So once we tab it over, and we fill its argument with self, then pause equals true, while paused, check everything, pause equals false, and we leave the game. So now we got pause working. Game active, all we have to say is this loop is currently perfectly acceptable the way it is. So we're going to take the whole thing, tab it over twice, I believe. Yep, twice is what we need for this. We need to say game active equals true. And then tabbed over once, we need to define go to how would I put this? Primary scene, the main scene. Go to game, define, maybe just call it play game. I suppose define play game works. Define pause, that works too. Just trying to create, variable names that make some sense here. So instead of just calling pause, we say self.pause. And of course, we have to change up all this stuff again because player is no longer just player. It's self.player because it's an object of the game. So we're just going to have to put in a whole bunch of self.things to get this thing associated with the actual game now. Self.gameWindow. Remember, we changed up the name of that just so it's shorter to type. Control V, Control V. A lot of pasting. I'm actually going to take a minute and swap everything out, all this red stuff, with the self and the new game window name, and then I'll be back. Alright, so I've changed everything up to be using self dot and of course the new game window style. So it's working, and we also need to actually tab these over 1 or 2 times. I just need to check, define, play game, because once this thing leaves the loop, it's all over, so make sure it's lined up. There we go. So we still quit when the game, of course, the main game loop exits. But now that this thing is an object, we actually need to create an object. So note that no code is actually happening. Well, only a couple lines of code are happening. But everything from line 120 all the way up to, let's see, line 9, none of this is happening now because this is all one game object. All we're doing is importing a bunch of different files into this object, and we're initializing Pygame. That's all we're doing right now in this main file. So, because we changed our game to be a game object, we need to actually call it. So I'm just going to say game is going to be equal to a, what did I call this, tutorial game? Yeah, tutorial game. Because that's what our game is. Our game is a new tutorial game. And then what do we do to start this? Well, we're going to say game dot go to menu. Because that's where we start. We go to the menu. And now that we've gone to the menu, this is where we're actually going to start playing the game. Now, the game doesn't actually get played. When we get to the menu, we reach this infinite loop where nothing happens. Or I should say, we just print intro because technically something is going to happen. And we update, tick the clock, and we repeat this until we push Q, in which case the menu gets set to false. Now, at this point, what we could do is once the menu gets set to false, we could say self.playGame because, this is where we'd start playing the game. This is really kind of bad because if we call play game here, what's going to happen is this entire while loop and the entire function itself is still there because this thing is running the play game. This function is running the play game call. And if the play game call, for some reason we ever, push go back to menu or something, maybe we have a button like that. If we ever go back to the menu, then we're going to create a new instance of the menu. And then when we leave that menu, we're going to create a new instance of the game. So this is why this is a problem. Because say we keep doing this. Say we go to, we go to the menu first. Let's call that 1. Our, how deep we are is 1. We play the game. Now we're 2 deep, right? Now while we're playing the game, we go back to the menu. Now we're 3 deep. In the menu, we hit play game again. Now we're 4 deep. Do you see how this is a problem? We keep going deeper and deeper, calling functions, but they never just close. It's not clean like pause. What pause does is it goes, yes, pause is true. When we hit P, pause becomes false, and this whole function just exits. It finishes. This while loop becomes false. We hit this line. It goes, all right, there's nothing here. I've cleanly exited my function call. That's nice. Go to menu isn't doing that. We can make it do that, however. And it doesn't matter where we put self.playGame, whether it's here or at the bottom of the function, even if it's outside the while loop. It doesn't matter. The fact that this function is still calling play game just makes it bad. So I actually don't want to call go to menu. I just want to say game dot play game. That's all I want to say is play dot, play the game. That's the first thing you do. Game active equals true. All right. What's the first thing I want to do though, before any of this? The first thing we do in play game, self.go to menu. Very first thing we do. And the reason we do it like this is because, okay, first thing we do with play the game, we go to the menu before the game loop. This is a one-time thing. We will go to the menu one time, we will get stuck in the menu, and then we will eventually, close out of the menu. That's all that's going to happen. And then once we close out of the menu, we hit Q, the while loop ends, we hit this blank line, and we exit the function call. And then once we exit the function call, we come here, we set game active to true, and then we play the game while game active, do all your game stuff. And that way we cleanly exit the function without, kind of recursively calling it, because that can be a problem if you go too deeply. Now, I don't imagine a player will go between the main game and the menu, constantly back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You can't really anticipate that, but it's still a good idea just to cover up for it. And I noticed we weren't doing an update on the pause menu. And the only reason we would really want to do some type of update on the pause menu is because maybe we wanted to draw something here like text that says pause. I mean, we can do that. And actually I will, just to kind of give you that example. Self.clock.tick. I could say self.fps. Makes more sense now instead of hard coding 30, since FPS is available to everything. So I just want to do that really quick. So let's see, the pause menu. Currently we just froze the game. I just want to freeze the game, but I also want to draw something to it. So all I'm going to say is I don't have to clear it. If I did clear it, then it would, maybe we want the pause screen to be something different. You'd say self.gamewindow.fill utils.white. And then of course, just like our play game that we do, it does the same thing. We can do that, but then that will clear everything you see. I just want to draw text to the screen. So I'm going to say self.gamewindow.blit. We'll call this text at the center. I want it to be in the center. So text rect. And I'll define both these right now. So text is going to be equal utils.get font. Size equals, I don't know, 96, something big probably. Let us, know that the game is being paused. Style equals bold. Render. What are we going to render? Paused. True for anti-aliasing, and we'll render it as black text, or utils.blacktext. And then text rect is going to be text rect equals text.get rect. Text rect.center equals self.gamewindow.get rect.center. Okay, so we just did standard stuff here. We've seen this lots of times, but this is an easy way to center things. Text rect.center, meaning the center of the text rectangle. So instead of setting X and Y individually, I'm just going to set the center equal to something. And I'm going to set it equal to the game window rectangle, gamewindow.getRect.center. And this will just center the text on the screen, a big, paused text. And then of course we're going to blit it, and then we're going to update. And that's what we're going to do. So let's test the new main loop and hope it works. Alright, black screen, intro being spammed down in the console. Let's hit Q. Okay, looks like the game we've been working on this entire time. Everything is still working as it should. There might be a couple things that mess up, and if they do, then I will be sure to fix them, but it appears to be working all correctly. Let's make sure we lose a life when we get hit. Yep, we do lose a life. Everything's working as intended. Let's hit P. We hit P. We got a big pause text show up. Get rid of P. Game unpause. Pause goes away. Of course, maybe we even want this to be a little bit larger, maybe more up at the top of the game. Who knows? Maybe you want the paused menu to have its own, screen or maybe dark in the background. I guess that's valid too. Whatever you're looking to do. So, there we have it. Everything is working the way it should be. So, what we did this time is quite a bit, but it's getting us prepared to start working on some other stuff. We got the game actually put into its own object, and the reason you would do this is say you have, you're playing like, I don't know, a simulation game, and it has like mini games inside of it. This is where this would be useful. Because then, minigame.play, you can call that, and inside of your main game. So you can create little tiny games or little tiny mini games and make your main game play them very easily if you make them an object. So that's why we made our own game an object. And there's other reasons for doing this. I'm doing it just for simplicity because we've been using objects the entire time. I mean, why not? It's something I've been wanting to get around to doing, and I finally have managed to do it. So of course we have a menu, we have a pause menu. We can create plenty of other menus as well. That's perfectly acceptable. But what I want to do next time, and we'll talk about that, is I want to do something about this. Oh look, we have a giant black screen. We can change the color of it, yes. We can change how we interact with it, that's okay. But what I want to change is instead of having to push Q to start the game, I want there to be some nice buttons that we can click. So much like how I showed the example of the health bars, how I would click on the square and they would lose health, I want to do the same thing, the same clicking action, except we're going to have buttons to navigate the menu. And maybe when we pause, instead of having to hit P, we can hit a button down here that also says play, which will unpause it. So next time we're going to talk about buttons, text buttons, and a lot about inheritance, so it's going to be very much confusing. Probably more confusing than this, but hopefully it'll make sense. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hopefully you followed along. Okay, you followed along. Okay, you understood what I'm trying to explain so that you're learning something. And yeah, thank you for watching. On a final note, the code is now available on GitHub, and there's a link in the description. If you want to look at the source code for this, it's going to be exactly what you see here. Everything that you currently see is what's going to be available for download. Everything in the main, basic enemy, generic player, and utils. Everything in these will be available so that you guys can download it, play around with it, change variables, try and understand how it works on your own. And that's because some of you were asking about it, so I figured I'd make it available. And again, probably for the third time. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.